Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I had to use the Concord and 9th Hello Lovely stamp set again. I said in the previous video when I used it with all the blotchy stamps in the set that my main intent with this set was to stamp and emboss this image with embossing powder and then to watercolor it. So I have some Canson XL watercolor paper here that was just a piece I grabbed out of my stash, and it just happens to be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I treated the watercolor paper with my anti-static powder tool, and then I am stamping the image with Versamark ink, and I'm just using my little Fiskars stamp press this time. My intent was to show everyone, like, you don't need to have a MISTI, there's ways around it. And then later on in the video, I use my MISTI anyway, because I just can't seem to not use it. So I used the stamp press this time anyway, and after stamping the image with the Versamark, I coated it with some detail white embossing powder. And then I'm using my heat tool to heat up this whole image to melt all of this embossing powder, and I like to tilt it in the light, especially when I'm embossing like basically white on white like this. It's hard to see everything, so I tilt it in the light to make sure that there's no areas that are dull or grainy looking, because that means they're not embossed. And if they are like that, then I make sure to hit those spots with my heat tool until they're shiny and melted. And then I pulled out, I want to die cut this image with the largest rectangle die from the Simon Says stitched rectangle set. So I pulled that out to make sure, to see how much space I was going to have along the edges so I could tape this down without going too far in. So I realized I had a little bit of room there, so I was able to tape this down because I wasn't sure how much water I was going to add to this piece, because I'm going to be using Tombow markers this time, and this is my first time using Tombow markers. I just got them. They've been on the market forever, but I've late to the party with these ones. I've been busy playing with my zigs and all kinds of other things. But finally got my hands on these, so I wanted to use them for this card. And I'm actually only using technically 3 colors plus gray, because it's for the color challenge for this week, which is basically peach, blue, and yellow. I wanted to do this entire image with just those 3 colors, and then I pulled in some gray just so I could add a little bit of shading around the edges. And this time I did the shading first, and I'm technically kind of doing what's called an underpainting, but I'm keeping it more towards the edges, towards the outside. I'm not really going over any of the main images much at all, because it's something I'm still kind of practicing with. Actually, this is the first time I've ever done it. And so I kept it really pale. You can barely see it. In real life, it just gives that little bit of definition, but it's not very dark. I didn't want to go too overboard with this. Plus, on top of it, I'm experimenting with these markers. So after I added that color along the edges and everything, I let that mostly dry. I didn't worry about it too much. That's the nice thing about having everything heat embossed, is it kind of keeps everything contained. And then I wanted to try coloring directly onto the watercolor paper with the markers and then pulling the color out. I've heard amazing things, and it's all true. These markers work beautifully for this. They move really nicely, especially on this Canson XL watercolor paper. The color pulled out gorgeously. I'm just using a silver size 6 paintbrush here, but I know a person could totally use a water brush. You don't need, a fancy paintbrush or anything like that. I just had the paintbrush out because that's what I used for that underpainting there, so I thought I would just keep using it. And I'm just going in and using the markers and then pulling the color out, and then sometimes picking up a little bit from the palette here that I've scribbled the markers onto as well. And keeping it mostly these main 3 colors. And the nice thing about this too, and that's why I chose this image, was there's a lot of leaves in this image, and I was like, I don't want to use other colors because it's not part of the color challenge. But if I mix that blue and that yellow together, I'm going to get some green, which just happens to work perfectly. So that's what I did. I just mixed them together with my brush on the palette there, and added the green to the leaves, and then I would kind of mix a little bit more of the blue in just to get a little bit of a different shade of green. I'm keeping everything really, really soft, really light. The whole idea, like spring and spring colors and soft pastels, that's like just screaming to me right now as the wind is blowing crazy here. It's still kind of cold and not very nice, but spring is coming. So after I kind of let everything dry a little bit, I scribbled more of the peachy color marker onto the palette. That's the only thing with the Tombows. They don't have names of colors on the barrels. It's just numbers. That's it. Just numbers. So it'll take me a little while to get used to that. But I added a little bit more color, then I let it dry completely. And then I'm peeling off the tape. I wasn't too careful with the tape because obviously I'm going to die cut this, so I don't really care about the edges. But if you are careful and pull it back against the tape, it usually will remove quite cleanly. And then I decided I wanted to add some splatter. So I pulled out the Prima metallic watercolor palette that I have, and there's kind of a blue color and an aqua green color. And I mixed those together, not a whole lot of it. And then I just grabbed an acrylic block so I can use that to kind of do just a really light splatter. I didn't want to go overboard. I just wanted to kind of bring in a little bit more blue. And the metallic watercolors are just so pretty. When it catches the light, you can just see that shimmer. And then I decided I wanted to add a die cut sentiment to this card. And so I pulled out this Script Friend die from Mama Elephant. And I had a remaining piece of this watercolor paper. So I just colored the same Tombow blue marker onto it. And realized I actually added way too much marker because I wanted to create more of like an ombre look and have it fade out towards the top. And these markers are really intense. So I ended up dabbing away some of it with a tissue just to lighten it up a little bit. And made sure to move the color along enough so that I can die cut this word completely from that. And then I was also, while I was sitting there doing this, that watercolor, the metallic watercolor was beside me, and I was like, ooh, I should add a little bit of that shimmery blue on top of this just to give it that little extra. So I picked up more of that from out and just added it lightly on top. Again, it doesn't give it a lot, but just a nice little shimmer. Again, in real life, it's just pretty. So impossible to kind of capture on camera, but just looking at this card right now, it's like it just has that nice, really light bit of shimmer. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Spectrum Noir sparkle pens, but a little more subtle. Just a little more subtle. So when everything was dry, completely dry, I ran the main panel through with that large stitched rectangle die. And then this other piece I ran through with that friend die. And while I was at it, I was able to die cut that word 2 more times from the remaining pieces of watercolor paper here. That way I'm going to be able to stack all of these together. And I thought I might as well cut them from those scraps of watercolor paper right there rather than grabbing other cardstock or anything like that. Plus then the sides of it, you know, it matches because it's all cut from the same paper, if that makes sense. So once I'm done with all my die cutting, I can pop out the centers from these letters, and I'm going to adhere them all together with multi-medium matte adhesive with the fine tip applicator. I've been still getting a lot of questions about these. The applicator is a separate purchase, and when you order the applicator, it comes with its own little bottle and then this fine tip applicator. All I do when I got it was I removed the applicator top with that fine tip from the empty bottle, and then I popped it onto my container of multi-medium matte. That's it. You don't need to fiddle around with refilling or anything like that. And when mine gets clogged, because it does, it just builds up. I have little like sewing pins, you know, with the funny little ends on them. I just pop one of those in there and unclog it, and I don't really have a problem with it. So I stacked the sentiment together. So I've got it layered 3 times. And then this is where I pulled up my Misty because I wanted to stamp the word hello that comes in the Hello Lovely stamp set. And I wanted to make sure I'm stamping this perfectly because I'm going to stamp it in black ink. I kind of, as I was making this card, I was like, do I really want to do this? I'm like, is the black going to be too harsh? Like, eh. So what I did actually was I used my little clear grid sheet. You can get these printed. You can download them from the My Sweet Petunia site, or you can actually order them from Simon Says Stamp. I'll include a link next to the Misty for it. But I used the grid sheet first to line up the stamp, and then I stamped the word onto the grid sheet just so I could kind of see it. And I was like, okay, this is going to work. So I inked it up again. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink here, and then stamped it right onto the watercolor piece. And once I'd stamped it, there's a couple little spots that go over the heat embossing, and it just kind of looked a little weird, I guess you could say. Nothing too horrible, but I thought to kind of combat that, I just grabbed a Sharpie pen and just kind of lightly went over just those like little embossed bits that the O went over. You could technically, it was a little redundant. It wasn't necessary, but I did it anyway. So once that's stamped, I'm going to adhere the die cut sentiment now with that same multi-medium matte adhesive. And once I've got that in place, I'm going to put an acrylic block down just to hold that so it can dry. And then add another tiny little dab of adhesive, and I'm going to pick up the dot for the eye and adhere that into place. So now I've got like my little watercolor panel here, And for my card base, I had to pull out some MFT Coral Crush cardstock. This color was perfect for this color challenge. It's just, and I just love this color anyway. It's so gorgeous. So I pulled that out, a sheet of that out, and cut it in half. So it's going to be a A2 size card, a top folding card. It's a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I scored that. I cut that in half with my Fiskars cutter and then scored it with my Teflon bone folder. And then I'm going to stamp this floral stamp again on the inside of the card with the same Versamark ink, because that's the great thing about Versamark ink, is not only is it great for embossing, but it also creates a really gorgeous like watermark effect. So it's a little bit more subtle than it would look if I got out my Coral Crush ink pad from MFT. Using Versamark is just slightly more subtle. And it just saved me from having to walk the 3 feet to the other ink pad. Anyway, stamp that on the inside of the card. Then I adhere the watercolor panel to the front of the card with foam tape. And then I pulled out my Studio Katya sparkling crystals that I love. They're so difficult to see in videos and even on cards and everything else. I've got a lot of questions about them. I know when I first looked at them myself, even in real life, I thought they were rhinestones, or not rhinestones, sequins. But they're actually flat-backed rhinestones is what they are. And they're just so pretty. So I adhered several of those to my card front with the same multimedia mat and my crystal katana to put them into place. And that finished off my card. So I will have a link below to my blog post, which will have a link to the color challenge, the supplies, all that info will be in the description box below the video and on my blog. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.